But just before I start, it's a personal burnout story, but I'd just like to find out if you're comfortable with it. Would you mind raising your hand if you actually went through a burnout-related experience in your own life as well? Okay, so there's quite a few. Okay, so this story we like to refer to as the time I almost lost my mind. So some time ago, I joined a company in the role of software engineer. And initially when I joined, everything just looked great. The company was had everything I was looking for in terms of the type of work I would be doing, the culture, everything. It wasn't, however, soon after I joined that I picked up that the team I was working in was kind of cultivating what I can best describe as a kind of aggressive culture, where mistakes that team members made were often highlighted in front of the rest of the group. When a team member lacked a certain skill, they were often met with a lot of disrespect. And the worst of all was that there wasn't frequent positive feedback, and mostly the feedback in between our biannual performance review sessions just focused on the negative. Okay, so that sucked. But that's not the end of the story. That's not everything that was thrown into the mix. At that point in time, I was actually also going through a very, very bad spell of imposter syndrome for reasons I don't have time to go into right now. And on top of that, our home life also wasn't ideal. First of all, we were busy building a house and were staying with family. And anyone who's been through that can attest to how absolutely stressful that can be. Furthermore, both Tanya and myself were studying towards our postgraduate degrees. And Tanya, at that time, in a role of HR manager, was facilitating a three-way merger and acquisition at a place of work. So in terms of home life, that almost didn't exist. We got home, studied, did our things, went to bed. So we didn't really talk to each other all that much. True story. So all of this played itself out over about a course of a year and resulted in a melting pot of sorts, where I became increasingly convinced that I was incompetent, that I would never find work anywhere else, and I was just too lucky to be working at this place where I was, even though I really didn't enjoy it. Now, all of this led me down a dark path of leading to hopelessness and actually on my way to depression as well. So the reason why I'm sharing this horrible story is twofold. First of all, it just kind of highlights how dangerous burnout can actually be to a person if you just leave it unchecked. And secondly, it also shows that the path leading to burnout is not always paved with elements what you would expect, like excessively long working hours, work overload, and stuff like that, because that just wasn't in the mix for me. However, the path that led to my burnout was a completely set of different factors that you normally wouldn't expect to actually lead to burnout.
Okay, so I think we need to just clarify what burnout is before we go on with the talk so that we are all on the same page. You can go and Google burnout and you'll just find a lot of definitions. So for today's talk, I want to describe burnout in the form of an analogy. So think about your bank account. Each one of us also has an emotional energy account. And we receive energy from certain things, as you can see the green there, and we need to use that energy to do certain things. So the first one we call resources, and then the latter is demands. I'm sure you'll agree that if we spend energy that we don't have, we'll go into a negative account balance. And that's basically what burnout is about. It's a process of that continuous negative emotional energy account. Furthermore, I really like to go to the origin of things. Who knows where burnout, where the term was used at first? No one? Okay, good. All right, then at least you'll learn something today. In the 1970s, burnout was a very everyday term used to describe the negative effects of chronic drug abuse. And this guy, he's an American psychologist, Herbert Freudenberger. He was consulting at a clinic. And he noticed that the volunteers who were volunteering at the clinic showed the same symptoms that the drug addicts showed. And he then borrowed the term and described those symptoms as burnout. Okay, so if you quickly look here, would you say that's someone who suffered from severe burnout? More or less? Okay, that's actually a photo of someone who's been abusing drugs. So that's basically what he saw. And that's where the danger of burnout comes. Okay, then also, burnout is not like a tummy ache where you just wake up one day and you have it. It occurs over time. A lot of a process we're not really aware of. And it affects all areas of our lives. Our health, our family, everything around you, without knowing it. Then also, I think it's just important to understand that the biggest danger of burnout is that if you leave it untreated, your employer might have to declare you as unfit for work. Okay, so we don't want to go there.
I have my own.
Okay.
Okay, so, okay, cool, it's a bit softer, okay. So, now that Tanya has scared you with how bad burnout can be, I would like to scare you a bit more and just explain a bit, or give a bit of information of how prevalent this issue actually is. So, to illustrate, in 1995, a group of researchers set out to determine the level of burnout amongst emergency medical practitioners. During this process, they asked the respondents a simple question: do you feel burned out? Now, during that time, approximately 25% of the respondents said yes, they do actually feel burned out. A year later, another group of researchers set out to determine the exact same thing. However, this time they didn't just ask a simple question. They actually had the people fill in what is called the Maslach Burnout Inventory Questionnaire, which is like a survey to determine the amount of burnout that you actually experience. This time, about 60% of individuals actually admitted to actually showing signs of burnout. Now, it can be anyone's guess what is the cause of this discrepancy. However, we believe it is at least in part due to people not understanding what the symptoms of burnout actually is. So, earlier this year, Blind on their platform did a survey amongst IT professionals registered on their platform, and they asked them a simple question: do you feel burned out? A staggering 58% of individuals said yes, they do actually feel burned out. Now, if you take that number and take into account the discrepancy that was found in those medical surveys, we might actually see that the problem may be actually much worse than what the Blind survey actually recorded.
Okay, great. So I think we all understand why it's important to know the indicators of burnout. I don't think this is an exhaustive list, but researchers agree on these indicators. So that's why we say check yourself before you wreck yourself. It's not just for you. If you don't show these signs and you might know about a colleague or someone, remember, not everyone is aware of these symptoms. So the first one is emotional exhaustion. That's really being drained by work. You're very, very tired. Even if you had a good night of sleep, you're still very tired. Also, being frustrated can be shown as emotional outbursts and even being cynical. The second one is depersonalization. It's just a big word for distancing ourselves from other people. That's where we become hardened and we treat people like objects. And we tend to not care about them, not care about what happens to them. And it's not being malicious, it's just because you don't have energy for people further. And then the last one is low personal accomplishment. So whether it's real or not, it's what that person is going through. So that's where we have problems with our competence. We feel that we can't really handle problems effectively as previously. We struggle to have positive influence on other people. And then most importantly for me is a loss of passion. The type of job that you really enjoyed, you don't enjoy it anymore. You're actually thinking of going into another industry. Okay, so now we understand a bit about how does burnout look It's not just working those excessive amount of hours and maybe walking around and say, oh, I feel so burnout today, because there's also people like that. And it might be in the beginning stage, but we're really talking here about the severe part of it. Okay, then the next part, I just want to share a resource that we use in industrial psychology to understand burnout a bit better. And I hope it's going to add some value for you. We call it the JDR model, Job Demands Resources Model. And this model was authored by Arnold Bakker and Eva De Maruti. You can go on Google, you can find lots and lots of articles and research on this. It was also applied in South Africa. So the basic assumptions of a model is that each job has its own characteristics, and these characteristics require certain job demands. Okay? If we're talking about job demands, these are the things that will take your energy. Think about emotional load. You're working with people. You have frequent client interaction. All those things takes our energy. Mental load. You solve problems. You have to perhaps concentrate in an open plan office. That's not always that easy. That takes your energy. See lots of heads nodding. Okay? The physical workspace. Mob programming, as far as I know, lots of people standing for long hours. Work-home conflict. Your wife and your children also have some expectations from you. That also takes your energy. Job overload, underload, most of those we know. Pace of change, uncertainty, bureaucracy, role conflict, role ambiguity. So in a self-managed team, who needs to do what? All those things takes our energy. On the other side, we have job resources. And these are the things that will provide us with energy. So for an example, social, we have support from our team, support from our supervisor, our team atmosphere, our team effectiveness. Then we also have our work, autonomy, decision-making. How involved are you in decision-making? Do you actually use the skills you have in your job? Because that can also provide you with energy. And tools. Do you have the required tools to do your job? The next one is organizational. And this is very important for me. I think the organization has a lot to do to prevent burnout. But it's basically communication, alignment of values, trust in leadership, think about justice, fair pay. Then we have developmental resources. This is where you get performance feedback. There's perhaps a career perspective for you. There's opportunities for you to grow. And then lastly, we have personal resources. That's like resilience, optimism, goal-directedness. We're going to spend a bit of time on the personal resources a bit later in the talk. Then just quickly to explain to you the model. So we have job demands on the y-axis and job resources on the x. When our job demands are high and our resources are high, we are engaged, which is great and awesome. However, if our job demands are high and our resources are low, we can go into a process of burnout. Resources does not have a motivational effect on its own. If the demands are low, we will be bored. If both of those elements are low, the person can develop apathy towards the organization. Okay. All right, so does that make sense for you? Okay. I also want to say, is there any leaders or managers here? The one thing I want you to take with you is that a resourceful environment can activate people's personal resources. So if you provide people with the right resources from the company side and from the leadership side, it can actually help their resilience, their optimism, and all those type of things.
I just want to mention before we start, and if it's okay, we start a little bit later, so we might run a bit into lunch. If you really get hungry, feel free to go. We won't take it personally. Just don't bite the person next to you if you really get hungry, please. So, so a lot of you sitting here may be working in agile environments, and life is peachy, and that's awesome. However, for some of you sitting here, you're thinking to yourself that, like, my life just got a hell of a lot worse since my company started doing agile, or doing wagile, or doing all these funny things. Now, in recent times, more and more organizations have been adapting agile methods to help them try to solve their business problems. However, a lot of agile transformations tend to focus heavily on processes and tools, but tend to neglect the important people practices such as proper change management and giving the people the resources they need to do their work. And that entire statement alone was actually quite ironic. Now, for example, if we look at the 4 agile values as per the Agile Manifesto, I'm not going to go through all of them, but let's just consider the top 2, interactions and collaboration. Those 2 values speak directly into the realm of emotional demands, as per the JDR model, where we have frequent people interaction, you have frequent giving and receiving of feedback, and there's that constant demands of having to deal with interpersonal conflict. Now, what the agile practices actually give us is some tools and resources to actually deal with those demands. However, a lot of people fail to realize that agile practices themselves also bring along with it some demands. For example, as Tanya mentioned earlier, just consider agile teams, where in a lot of environments, these teams need to function as self-managed teams. That speaks directly into the realm of role ambiguity. And it is very interesting to note that the 2 biggest, or actually research has shown that the 2 biggest risk factors for burnout is actually that of the emotional demands and role ambiguity. Now take everything I've just said and bring on top of that industry demands, IT industry demands. For example, the high pace of change and the high mental load that's put on people. And you can actually see why workers in agile teams workers in agile environments need resources. Now, it's also very important to note that the demands of workers in agile environments is actually quite different than the demands of workers in more traditional command and control type organizations. And I know a lot of you are thinking, duh, of course, that's the case. However, it is very important to realize that the resources these people need are actually also very, very different.
Okay, so you ask yourself, okay, now you've given us all of this information. What am I going to do when I'm finished at the conference? What can I take home? And I want to discuss the personal resources in a bit more detail because I think that could be a few quick wins for you in your life, not only to prevent burnout, but also to handle your overall stress. Okay. So first of all, is it moving? Let's just quickly talk about severe burnout. You might ask yourself, okay, but when in this process must I go and see a professional? And it can vary, but for me, apart from being very, very, very tired, also if you see that you have actions that contrast with your personal values, that you have emotional outbursts, that you have distanced yourself from other people, that become hardened. Thoughts of harming yourself or other people, or a very low personal effectiveness. I would really say just go to a professional. If your company has an employee assistance program, go to that. Else, go to an industrial psychologist or clinical psychologist who can help you with this. Also, if you are in a company with a pathological type of culture, okay, so what do we mean with that? That is when leadership takes the resources for themselves. They don't provide people with resources, and they're normally very power-oriented. Then you are at high risk for burnout. So I would really then recommend, if you can't change that, rather look for alternatives. Okay, so let's look at the personal resources. These are things you can control. Okay? This is not just inherent and that, for an example, resilience. Not everyone is just resilient. Most of us had some training or we've had some experience to build our resilience. What is resilience? It's to be like a rubber band that you stretch and it goes back to its old form. It's the way we handle setbacks. It's the way we handle failures and mistakes. A few guidelines to increase your resilience would include, if you have a setback or failure, don't go and spiral And don't beat yourself with a stick for days. Okay. Make sure you switch off when you leave work. That has a huge effect on your resilience. Make sure that you find time to relax and do something that you enjoy, because you're going to get energy from that. So resilient people can handle stress and they can recover from setbacks quite quickly. Then we have optimism. And I know it is very hard. Some of you are laughing. But think about the victories. Think about the things you're doing right as well. Even if you made a mistake, make a point to focus on those positive things. Celebrate successes. Don't just react on negative feedback. Flexibility. Make use of flexibility. If you have flexible hours, work practice, but also ensure that you are flexible, specifically in the agile environment, to respond to change. With that, boundaries. We've had quite a few talks about conflict handling already today. And boundaries, for me, first of all, being assertive. What does assertiveness mean? You stand up for your rights in such a way that you protect other people's rights as well. And with assertiveness, you need conflict handling skills. And there's actually 5 ways of handling conflict, not just 2. Okay, so if you're not sure if you can handle conflict and you are in an agile environment, I would really recommend that you go for training. Then we have proactiveness. Who is in the driver's seat? You or people around you and circumstances? So rather be proactive and be ready for the change. Goal-directedness, and this is one that's very close for me. Understand your why. Understand why you are doing what you're doing. Understand your own values and make sure that your values correspond to that of your companies, because that will give you a lot of energy. Set realistic goals, because idealistic goals can also get you into a process of burnout. When you have stressful times or negative, something happened like a setback or a failure, revisit your values and your goals, because that's going to give you energy. And then self-development. We're living in the 21st century of a career world. Put your career in your own hands. Go and upskill yourself. Make sure you build on your strengths. Don't go and spend energy into weaknesses, because I believe that's why we need each other. We need to be interdependent on each other and focusing on our strengths. Make sure that your career is in your own hands. Then lastly, a few other things you can do. The one is job crafting, and that's where you go to your employer and say, okay, these are the demands of my job. These are the resources available. Let's craft my job in terms of that. That can have a huge buffering effect on burnout, but the employer must obviously be willing to assist with that. Find a mentor or coach. That can be very helpful. To just go and sit and talk with someone. Even if you think, oh, you know what, I'm in a stressful time now, I need to go and speak to someone. Find someone who's a role model, someone who's willing to walk that personal journey with you. And lastly, locus of control. Again, who is in the driver's seat? In my opinion, everyone can be in the driver's seat. You are not powerless.
Yeah, so just to end off with, and to go back to the story I was busy telling before I got so rudely interrupted. For me, the change came when Tanya and I finally started to talk. Now, I'm blessed to be married to a woman that knows what's going on. Probably looked like something out of season 4 of The Walking Dead by the time we actually had the conversation. But I'm happy that we did. And what she actually helped me was those 3 lies I told you about. She actually just helped me break down those lies I was actually telling me about, and to realize I was more valuable than I gave myself credit for. Now, for me in the end, as I was actually having more and more conversations, a friend reminded me of Martin Fowler's wise words when he said, if you're not in a place where you can change your organization, then change your organization. Great, that's it. We are actually into lunch right now, so I'm not sure if there will be time to answer any questions. Oh, 5 more minutes. Are there any questions anyone feel comfortable with? I'll just direct everything that side.
Any questions?
Okay, great. So it doesn't look like it. And if anyone wants to chat afterwards, yeah, you're more than welcome. Thanks very much for
Thank you,
attending.
everyone.